I like to move it, move it. I like to move it, move it. You like to move it.
Hello amigos. Welcome to Move It Movie. As today's movie porter, we are transporting a post-apocalyptic horror TV series, The Walking Dead, Season 10. It is based on the comic book series of the same name by Robert Kirkman, Tony Moore, and Charlie Adlard, together forming the core of the Walking Dead franchise. The series features a large ensemble cast as survivors of a zombie apocalypse trying to stay alive under near-constant threat of attacks from zombies known as walkers, among other nicknames. However, with the collapse of modern civilization, these survivors must confront other human survivors who have formed groups and communities with their own sets of laws and morals, sometimes leading to open, hostile conflict between them. Just over a decade ago, the idea of a zombie show being one of the most popular shows on television was a strange thought, but upon its debut, The Walking Dead proved just how ravenous audiences were for this brand of storytelling. It was not just the zombie killing and horrific deaths that drew people in, though. The only way for a show like this to survive is to get you invested in the human characters. From the opening scene of Rick Grimes navigating this world newly devolved into chaos, you became invested in his journey and those that made up his group. For the past 10 years, we have learned that while zombies are no picnic, they often pale in comparison to the baser tendencies of humanity pushed to the brink. There have been some triumphs and more tragic losses than we can even count, and where it stands, only a select few count themselves among the initial batch of characters we started following. The 10th season of the show is the first full season without Rick, and presents some new signs of life on the way to its supposed final 11th season. This latest season picks up months after the events of the 9th season, which introduced the Whisperers as the big current threat. The loathsome leader Alpha and her right-hand man Beta really struck a blow to our heroes in the kingdom and solidified themselves as one of the most ruthless adversaries yet. Much of this season concerns both the psychological fallout of what they have done, and the continued threat they continue to pose, both in their personal actions and their ability to wield hordes of the undead like a weapon. An early standout episode of the season is one in which we learn how Alpha evolved from a normal, well-adjusted person trying to survive the zombie apocalypse to the unhinged leader of a terrifying clan. Morton is a bit over the top, but she imbues the character with a lunacy that really works at the end of the day. She is complemented well by Beta, who likewise gets more fleshed out this season as his relationship with Alpha gets more complicated. One of the other standout characters is the former chief villain of the show, Negan. His evolution from black-hearted psychopath to member of the community that he once tortured has been a rocky one, but never less than fascinating. Morgan turns in his best performance of the series yet in his origin episode that takes a closer look at Lucille. There is a nice balance for the remainder of the season between finding new facets to characters we have known for a long time, and learning more about others who have been relegated to the background up until this point. One of the biggest sticking points of this season is the dynamic between Carol and Daryl, which ebbs and flows thanks to some emotional choices that are made. Like any season of The Walking Dead, there are plenty of losses throughout this expanded 22-episode season, some that break your heart and some that will make you cheer. It never quite reaches the depths of earlier seasons, but it is the strongest it has been in some time. In a lot of ways, The Walking Dead has morphed into the rotted flesh-hungry beasties which give the show its name, and that's not entirely a bad thing. Sure, there's been long stretches where it was just kind of shuffling along, aimless, mindless, and oozing. But as it heads into Season 10, I can't help but be impressed that this gruesome, monstrous thing is also still very much alive. Put another way, aw crap, The Walking Dead is good again. Showrunner Angela Kang continues the momentum she built in the wake of Andrew Lincoln's Season 9 helicopter exit by keeping things equal parts smart and scary, with a focus on the Whisperers, the eerie antagonists who have turned this show back into a scream. The early episodes of The Walking Dead Season 10 are essentially a Cold War during the apocalypse. Following the ghastly head chop-ins that ended Season 9, our main survivors live in constant fear of another Whisperer's strike, carrying out military-style training sessions with the dead to keep limber. But the skin-wearing baddies across the border aren't interested in another all-out attack. They operate under a simple system: don't cross our borders, and we won't have to seriously mess your shit up again. However, a new problem that literally falls from the sky forces the residents of Alexandria, Hilltop, and Oceanside dangerously close to Whisperer territory, and tensions boil over into terror. This storyline, which seems ponderously slow on the surface, is a clever way to introduce dread back into the series. If you're hoping for some horror elements, there are a few scary and grisly moments which come on episodes 2 and 3. I'm not talking about lame jump scares either. If you're hoping to see a lot of the undead, TWD gives you more than enough zombie deaths to handle. Pay close attention to the opening credits. Not only is Rick Grimes' presence alive and well, but you'll notice a few little Easter eggs throughout. You're going to want to go back and watch it a few times to catch the added weapons, names, and stained glass window panes added to a tree. By now, The Walking Dead themselves are barely a threat unless they've gathered in the thousands, or you're a cast member who signed on to do a network pilot. Season 10, which is filled with shots and montages of survivors living their day-to-day in a rot-filled hellworld, posits that the scariest thing left in this reality is nothing. When you've built a semblance of a normal life and the immediate threat of death by face-chomping or warring tribe has basically died down, but you're still jumping at shadows. That's terrifying. The idea that this anxiety is all there is and all there ever will be. The show finally slows down enough for everyone to realize they have severe PTSD, whether they voice it or not. A thesis bluntly laid out by Norman Reedus. Daryl Dixon. Sometimes I think we're just surviving from one fight to the next. There's no doubt The Walking Dead can continue without its lead star Andrew Lincoln. Coming off of an excellent, well-reviewed Season 9, TWD's strength is in its core heroes Reedus, McBride, and Uriah, and villains, who are actually worth fearing. The trio of Reedus, Melissa McBride's Carol, and Denai Uriah's Michonne has essentially become the face of The Walking Dead, and unsurprisingly these three are doing some of their best work here. Reedus is a weary Daryl who isn't physically living in the woods anymore but might have left a chunk of his will in the wild. Uriah as a Michonne violently stuck between replacing Rick Grimes the leader and emotionally getting over the loss of Rick Grimes the person. McBride, who has low-key always been the MVP since 2010, as a Carol whose everything is fine complexion is a barely there mask for a new level of trauma that has severely warped her reality, both figuratively and literally. But the performance that has straight up jolted The Walking Dead with some truly out there energy is Samantha Morton as Whisperer Leader Alpha. The two-time Oscar nominee's presence here calls to mind Marlon Brando's psychotically magnetic Colonel Walter Kurtz in Apocalypse Now, and not just because of the shaved head. It's in the unpredictable performance choices Morton makes at every turn, her voice inflection, the way she holds herself, the way she makes a horrific meal out of a simple line like "we are always watching." The highlight of the first 3 episodes is a Whisper-focused chapter, "We Are the End of the World," written by Nicole Mirante Matthews and directed by Greg Nicotero, that flashes back and forth between the crew's present-day infighting and the origin story of Alpha meeting Beta, acted by Ryan Hurst. In the present, you've got Morton and newcomer Thora Birch adding emotional depth to the Whisperers, but the flashback sequences feel startlingly like early days Walking Dead when the apocalypse was new and zombies were, terrifying. It's been a while since this show got a genuine squirm out of me, but an innocent bystander in episode 2 meets one of the gnarliest ends in a good long while. If you're not completely feeling TWD after the season premiere, just hold in there because things are going to start ramping up quickly over the next 2 episodes. The conflict between the Whisperers and Michonne's group is certainly going to come to a head, perhaps sooner rather than later, as the show loosely adapts the Silence the Whisperer comic arc. However, if you think you know how everything's going to go down, guess again. We're so far off comic at this point that for the first time in the show's history, it's tough to predict exactly where it's going. That works to its benefit. The Walking Dead feels fresher than ever. Though the bulk of the material presented in this year's 6 additional Season 10 episodes had a super strong "this could have been an email" vibe, The Walking Dead smartly saved the best for last, delivering the Negan origin tale most fans have been wanting for years, especially since the all-out war arc ended. Here's Negan, which borrows slightly from the character's comic origins, but then nicely spins things off for the series' sake, is an actual worthwhile and heartfelt rest stop before Season 11 kicks off at the end of August. Star Jeffrey Dean Morgan was fortunate enough to play opposite his wife, actress Hilary Burton, and their real-life levels of familiarity really helped elevate this flashback story, since many of the scenes here were solely between Negan and Burton's Lucille. COVID-era protocols pretty much pared these 6 additional Walking Dead episodes down to a bare minimum cast, with most scenes over the past month and some change featuring only 2 or 3 people maximum. And you could definitely feel the strain of that, especially during last week's Carol Makes Soup episode. In Here's Negan, however, that type of default intimacy was used as an advantage. The idea of Lucille, as not just Negan's late wife, but as someone who, at one point in time, could tolerate Negan enough to marry him, has been a long-standing mystery on the series. With only Negan's barbed wire bat serving as a recurring and brutal reminder, the very concept of Lucille implied that Negan, perhaps, was a very different person in the past. We've seen glimpses of a kinder, gentler Negan over the years, but it usually only emerges when kids are involved, like Carl or Judith. At the top of this episode, you'll easily notice that Negan is an extremely changed individual. Because even during his covert time behind enemy lines with the Whisperers, he was cocky and smarmy and held all the old hallmarks of Negan. And even before that, as a prisoner, he still maintained a swagger. But here, just walking with Carol, Morgan plays Negan with much more muted notes. Even his voice sounds different. He's not the Negan character anymore. As Negan travels back to the tree in the field where Rick slashed his throat to find his lost bat, we're whisked back into Negan's life just a few days before the world falls apart. He's an unambitious man-child with a tempter that recently cost him his job as a high school gym coach. We also enter Lucille's life right at the tipping point, when she's just about had her fill of Negan's lovably lost ways. She's grown out of her I can fix him phase, and now wants more from her partner. Which is, of course, the perfect time to find out you have cancer, discover your man's cheating on you, and oh, you learn that zombies are on the rise. Negan's apocalypse origins are pretty wrenching and yet, at the same time, not wildly different from other people's strife we've seen on the series. His perils out in the open, freshly decimated world are somewhat typical. He meets friendlies. He meets a-holes. It's not a hugely original tale, but it feels elevated because it's Negan, and we're invested in this oddball reverse redemption story where we see the caring person he used to be, and then how and why that all changed. Almost everything about Here's Negan works. Morgan and Burton's chemistry is awesome by wholly selling us on Negan being a man who, when faced with the worst, will totally circle the wagons around someone he loves. Of course, he's also someone who takes advantage of people and doesn't know how good he's got it until he's faced with losing his comfy setup. Within both of them, there are multitudes. Lucille comes to appreciate Negan's devotion and spares him the knowledge that she knew about his affair until later on, while he's able to go above and beyond while trying to save someone he loves. Cutting up the flashbacks into a weird time shuffle felt unnecessary. But then again, The Walking Dead decided, years ago, that it was going to be less of a straightforward zombie drama and, instead, become more of a purposefully cryptic series that leans into arthouse narrative structures and showy camera setups. The other bit of Here's Negan that hits, perhaps, in an opposite manner than intended, is the use of Joe Cocker's "You Are So Beautiful" while Negan is crying and Lucille is a writhing walker. It just plays like a comedy, unfortunately. Something that's funny in a good way, though, is the reveal that Negan's trademark leather jacket is basically a symbol of his old careless ways. The piece of clothing he thought he deserved because he'd made a few attempts, or claimed to, at finding a new job. He was someone who thought of responsibility as a big old drag, so it was wonderful to see him shift into a guy who was willing to absorb every ounce of responsibility for his wife's care. So much so that he wouldn't let Lucille die when she wanted to. Switching things up from the comics, Lucille takes her own life here, after weeks of recaptured time with Negan, holed up in their house, while the world crumbled into chaos around them. Negan then, upon realizing his toils and troubles out on the road were for nothing, coated his heart with a hard shell. A vengeful Negan emerged. One whose first extended kill came complete with a monologue. Here's Negan matched the low-key, thinned-herd vibe of the other 6 episodes while also being the most rewarding. Negan's decision to sort of let the chips fall where they may with Maggie was a curious one. It seems to represent a Negan who's done apologizing for his past, and now willing to accept her wrath should it come to that. If nothing else, Season 10 does also put renewed focus on good old-fashioned practical horror. That's likely Nicotero's influence, which shows in the way The Walking Dead still manages to sculpt a visually stunning monster even when the narrative is a slog. And folks, The Walking Dead Season 10 isn't immune to the series' trademark slogginess. This show is still a huge ensemble where far too much of that ensemble has the same issues, and they will be discussing them for several scenes at a time. But there's no denying Season 10 zips with an energy this world hasn't felt in a long time. On a show this bleak, glimpses of hope like that can go a long way.
They don't get to live.
Rick, we got out. It's over.
It's not over.
I like to move it, move it. I like to move it, move it. You like to move it. I like to move it, move it. I like to move it, move it. I like to move it, move it.